if it's R2, then area
Mhm.
integral over. That's
Right.
it.
Yeah. So, and before Campbell's theorem, did we
Yeah,
discuss anything
palm.
else?
We saw palm distribution, like a
Mhm.
new way of defining uh, conditional distributions such that there exists a point at our origin.
Mhm.
So that was based on expectation of, I don't exactly
Right. No, so don't
expectation
worry
of.
about it. It will come back again. I mean, in our course, and at that stage, we will have a more elaborate discussion on that. There was, yes, you are correct in pointing out that we ended up with Campbell's theorem, which enables us to evaluate expectation of sum of point functions. Right. So that's one important point. So, what the expectation of a quantity that we are trying to measure should be in a summation form. Right. And I mentioned that I would be uploading a separate video for the proof of Campbell's theorem. But I think I will discuss the probability generating functional of a Poisson point process today. And I will upload the proofs of both of them together. But before that, we had ended up with a practical example on how it or how this particular theorem or Campbell's theorem would enable us to let's say deduce some important insights into a cellular network. In particular, what we were focusing on is what would be our aggregate interference from a field of base stations, where the base stations are Poisson point process distributed, or the locations of them rather is modeled according to a Poisson point process. What we are interested in is that for a mobile phone located at the origin of this two-dimensional plane, what would be the aggregate interference from all the base stations that are present within a ring of A to B, which means the distance of these base stations are greater than A from the center but less than B, right? So, what we had previously was this guy, and we had converted it into polar coordinates, of course, to reach here. And since it is isotropic in nature, which means that a Poisson point process, it doesn't matter which direction we look into it, the statistics remain the same. There is no dependence on this function on the angular domain. So it only matters where your base or how far your base station is located from the origin, not at which angle, right? We will later come into millimeter wave networks and so on, where it would matter the direction. Okay, but for the moment, direction doesn't matter. Interference only affects in as a function of the distance. Okay, so then we evaluated it, and if you remember in the previous class, we had put the value of alpha as 2. So alpha, which is called the path loss exponent, is a parameter which dictates how your power or trans or received power varies in terms of the power law as a function of the distance. So a generic way to write it is alpha. There is a trick here though. If you are to an astute observer, you might notice that if we put r equal to 2, right, the evaluation of this integral from this step to this step is not the same as we have done it here before, right? So do you remember what would have been the case when alpha was equal to 2?
ln b by a.
Right. So it would have been 1 by r, and it doesn't really follow the same integral form as any other power law, right? Never mind. And for this moment, if we still consider it to be some value of alpha, which is probably not 2, it evaluates as step A, which can be rewritten as this step B, right? It's just rearrangement. From this final expression, we can observe a couple of things very quickly, right? So what happens, for example, when B tends to infinity, right? So the first observation that we want to do is what happens when B tends to infinity, right? What does that mean practically? It means that the interference comes from the entire two-dimensional plane outside of an exclusion zone of radius a, which means if your mobile phone is located at the center, right, we define an exclusion zone within which even if there is a base station located, we are not experiencing any interference from it, possibly because of some coordination mechanisms or interference management mechanisms. But outside of this radius of outside of this circle of radius a, if b tends to infinity, all the other base stations are creating an interference, right? So in this case, if b tends to infinite, we can observe that the interference is finite only if alpha is greater than 2, right? So if you remember the previous class, if alpha is equal to 2, right, then we are at a problem, right? So for the moment, suppose that you have a finite a, right? So this term is still okay, right? This was the part which we had ended up in the last lecture. But if b is infinite, sorry, yeah, if b is infinite, alpha equal to 2 gives an infinite value of the interference. Can you give me a let's say intuitive justification for why this is happening? Why, for example, a path loss exponent of 2, why 2 is an important parameter at this stage? I understand mathematically why it is true, but intuitively, why do you think it is true? I hope the question is clear, right? The question
So,
is that, yeah,
please repeat.
yeah. So the question is that if your path loss exponent, right, is 2, right, which means that an interference from a distance of r varies as 1 by r square, right? Why it happens that the interference, the aggregate interference or the sum of the interference that you are observing at the center of, or the origin of this Cartesian plane, is infinite when b tends to infinity. So remember, understand here at this point that suppose if alpha is greater than 2, right, what happens if alpha is greater than 2? Even if b tends to infinite, this term goes to 0, right? So suppose alpha equal to 3, right, it becomes 1 by b. Yes. In case 1 by b, where b tends to infinite, this term goes to 0. On the other hand, for any other value of alpha which is less than 2 or equal to 2, right, it doesn't matter. It becomes a very complicated thing, because when alpha equal to 2, this form isn't valid. Rather, this form is valid, because we saw that when alpha equal to 2, it becomes integral of p by r, which evaluates as log of r, and log of b minus log of a, this term goes to infinite for any finite a but infinite b, right? So the question is this: why do you think this number 2 is important here, and why do you think that the aggregate interference goes to infinite when alpha equal to 2, when we are considering the entire two-dimensional plane? Is the question clear for everyone, or is there someone who is still confused? I can try to explain it in a different way. Please don't worry about these things. Please feel free to interrupt in case something is not clear. Any guesses? So the intuition is this. So each base station which is getting added in your set of interferers, right, it's impacting this summation of interference term proportional to 1 by its distance squared, right? Now as we are keeping on increasing our boundary of observation, which is this circle b, yeah, so this b, and we are trying to extend this boundary until infinite, right? Two things are happening. The farther we go, more base stations are getting added, but a farther located base station is less impactful in the interference term, because the more the distance, the less will be the interference power, because it varies as 1 by r square. However, the number of base stations that are getting added is proportional to the area of the increase of this observation area, observation ring, right? So since the number of, or the average number of interferers is growing quadratically with b, as we saw in a Poisson point process, because a Poisson point process, average number of base stations is proportional to some lambda times the area of where we are considering, right? The average number of interferers grows exponentially with b. So the interference each one contributes needs to reduce by more than the inverse square law if the sum of the interferences is to be remained finite. Is this explanation at least intuitively clear what I'm trying to say? Or is there some confusion? It's a very simple thing. It's
Can
just
you
to say,
repeat the
yeah,
last statement?
right. So there are two things happening, right? Each additional interferer is causing an interference according to the inverse square law if alpha equal to 2. Yes. However, number of such additional base stations when you are increasing B is growing quadratically with B, right? Why? Because the average number of base stations in a given area is proportional to the lambda times the area of that observation, right? So can you tell me what would be the average number of base stations in this ring between A and B?
Lambda pi
The
is pi b square minus a square.
Yeah, everybody agrees with this one. So this is the average number of base stations that are located here. Now, if we see this quantity as a function of B, right? If B increases, the average number of base stations increases quadratically. Average number of base stations. Now, each of such base stations, when they are added, they are impacting this summation term as the inverse square law in case alpha equal to 2, right? So, if the number of base stations or the average number of base stations grows quadratically with B, the interference each one of them contributes need to reduce by more than the inverse square law, so that the sum of such terms become finite, right? Is this convincing enough?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Hmm.
So sir, basically, we are penalizing faraway stations more than close ones.
Mhm. So sorry, so what I want to say is that if you want to select a particular alpha, suppose you want to select I mean, what you are intuitively saying is the correct one, and we will come to those models later on, where we say that okay, if the base station is very far located, they might be um, I mean, their interference must be getting impacted more than just the distance, because they are very far located. Maybe there are more blockages and so on. So they might be modeled with a different alpha. But that's not the discussion we want to have at this stage. We just want to know that if our model is to be defined with a particular alpha for all the base stations, right? What type of alpha we should choose for a Poisson point process model?
Sir, so like
Yeah.
just to so I'll
Mhm.
extend if I extend your logic, let me know if I'm saying correct. So if I assume like hypothetically, for example, we are in a spherical room and we are
Mhm.
instead of increasing a disk on R2, we are increasing a ball in R3.
Mhm.
And there we would have demanded the alpha to be greater than 3.
Right.
Okay.
So the more number in case your base stations are also located in the air, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's
Yeah.
what hypothetically.
Yeah. So in case you want to observe an infinite domain and you want to have a summation of certain point functions which individually impact the summation, you want individual contributions to be at least as decreasing with distance as the average number of such points or such functions increase with the distance, right? From a practical point of view, what it means is that the free space, I think I answered Vaibhav your question. Is it clear? So you're supposed to select an alpha. What
Yes.
alpha you can select? The basic conclusion we want to draw is that you cannot select alpha equal to 2 for Poisson point process models if you are modeling interference, for example.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Hmm. From a practical point of view, it means that this free space propagation, which is alpha equal to 2, which we had deduced or inferred using this freeze uh, path loss equation, right? It's not quite sufficient for a Poisson point process network that extends infinitely in the plane. So that's one observation. So if B tends to infinity, the expected value of IA is finite if and only if alpha is taken to be greater than 2. Okay. Can you point me out any other problem with this model? So we have characterized what is the average received or average sum of interferences with such base stations. Okay. One problem we found out this model is that this might not be valued for all alphas, in particular for alpha greater than. Remember that alpha should at least be 2 for a omnidirectional transmission, right? We saw how the energy dissipates as inversely to the square of the distance, right, per surface area. So it should at least be 2, but the problem with this model in Poisson point processes is that it cannot be 2, right? That's the first deduction. What other observation can we draw for with such point process models using such a power law? Remember, our path loss law is simply p r to the minus alpha, right? This is the path loss for each base station we are considering, right? And we are observing an infinite network, right? Any other observation? Anyone? So my question is, suppose you have now fixed alpha is greater than 2, maybe alpha equal to 3, choose 3 probably. Can we have A equal to 0? So this is a question we would want to answer, and I will go to a larger point that I want to establish. But let's start with this simpler point. Can we have A equal to 0? Which means, can a finite interference be achieved in case you are observing exactly at one of the interferer locations? In other words, or in other perspective, can we have an interferer located exactly at the origin and still have a finite interference? Anyone? I mean, I think what you are thinking is correct. Just say it.
Infinite.
By
Yeah,
A
it goes to infinite, right?
goes
So if I want to draw a larger perspective here, so suppose you are transmitting with a certain power P. Okay, so your transmit power is P, and you are saying that my received power at a distance of R is P R minus alpha. Okay, with this observation, this one, we are saying that, okay, let's not say that there is anyone present in the origin. So R is greater than 0, not greater than equal to 0. Is this still okay, or is there still some problem with this path loss model? So you have a transmitter, you have a receiver, right? And the distance between them is R. Suppose your power transmitted is 10 watts. Yeah. And let us suppose we select an alpha equal to, I don't know, 3. Yeah. So can you calculate the received power at a distance of R equal to, let's say, 0.5 meters from you? So what is the received power?
Sir, it, for R less than 1, I think it will not be valid.
Exactly. So for R less than 1, yeah,
For this model, it will give more received power as compared to the transmitted.
exactly. So for the received power, you would have 10 multiplied by 0.5, which is basically half, right? To the power minus 3, right? This becomes greater than 10. So of course, physically it is not possible, and accordingly this is not a good model to actually emulate physical networks. So in general, what people do in the literature have a modified path loss model. So some of the modified path loss models are your path loss is equal to minimum of either 1 or R minus alpha. This is one way to say that if you have R less than 1, you just consider it as 1, which means if your base station is located at the origin, let's say, within a radius of 1 meter, you would say that if a receiver is located within the radius of 1 meter, it receives exactly what is transmitted. Beyond this 1 meter, it varies as r to the minus alpha. Other path loss models also exist, which model the dissipation of power as r plus 1 to the minus alpha. This is also something which is done to avoid this singularity at the origin, or I mean to forcefully say that we are observing beyond 1 meter. Okay, so these are these are not scientific things, because models, some of you might already know, models are derived from a large scale observations and experimentations, right? So models are derived by looking at a lot of data, right? Of course, such a path loss model, which is p r to the minus alpha, is a very simple, elegant way to model the distribution or the dissipation of power, the loss of power as we travel in the distance. But of course, there needs to be some engineering interventions to avoid these analytical problems. What are these engineering interventions? We do a modified path loss model. So, okay, I know that I have digressed a bit from, let's say, stochastic geometry, and I mean discussing these engineering things, but this will keep on coming back again and again once we actually go to model wireless networks. Okay. Until this point, is there any question? Yes, no?
No, sir.
Okay. Please feel free to interrupt if you have any question. Okay. Okay. Before we proceed into the next concept, to close this expectation of, let's say, sum of functions, the story would not be complete if we do not discuss the expectation of the product of functions. Do you remember from the second class what it is called? The expectation of product of functions?
Sir, PGFS.
Right. So the PGFL, so we have seen for a Poisson point process, how can we evaluate the expectation of the sum of functions. Now we are going to see how we would be able to calculate the expectation of product of functions. Specifically, the PGFL of a homogeneous Poisson point process is, again, I am stating this theorem without any proof. The proof of this clubbed with Campbell's theorem's proof, I'll upload it a bit later. Again, for the perspective of this course, the proofs are not important. I mean, it's a more mathematically oriented course that would be interested in this. We are just going to use these results in our derivations. Okay. So the PGFL of point process phi is defined as the expected value of product of functions evaluated at these points xi, where xi belongs to this point process. It is evaluated as the exponential of minus the intensity and integral over the domain 1 minus the function of x and the integral. Okay, so this is something which we will come across again and time and again, and by the end of this course, this would be absolutely embedded in your mind. Don't worry about it. But for the moment, just see these nuances. Even if you miss a couple of points or a couple of details in this expression, it's fine, because we will always have it as a reference when we do the evaluations. So whatever function we have here, similar to Campbell's theorem, we are not going to each of these points xi and evaluate it. Rather, we are evaluating this point, this function f at a generic point x, and we are integrating this point across the domain, right? And we are taking the void probability of it with respect, or similar to a term which represents the void probability, which is e to the power minus lambda times whatever we evaluate. Okay. Of course, we can extend it to non-homogeneous Poisson point processes, and similar to the discussion we had for Campbell's theorem, there in this case for a non-homogeneous Poisson point process, lambda, since due to the non-homogeneity, it will become inside the integral as lambda of x, because intensity would depend on where x is. Okay. I hope this is clear, this discussion. Don't focus too much on this expression. Once we use it continuously again and again, we will be getting used to it, right? The probability generating functional in general is useful for converting this expectation of product of point processes into a hopefully computable integral. Okay, this integral might not, depending on what function this is, might not always give you a closed form result. Okay, but hopefully we will be able to convert this product into a computable integral. As we discussed earlier in the second class, we saw that the Laplace transform of a random variable can be evaluated using the probability generating functional, right? So I will not be repeating it here, but it was simply the expected value of, okay, for the purpose of completeness, let's repeat it. So the Laplace transform, okay, which is expected value of e to the power minus sf, which is given as the expected value of exp of minus summation of all point functions belonging to phi s of some functions gx, or for the sake of continuity, let's write it as fxi, right? This is called the probability generating functional, or something like this, or something like this, of the function e to the minus f sf, right? And this is evaluated as exponential of minus lambda over the entire domain, which is R2 in this case, or Rd in the general case, e to the minus s fx evaluated at the generic point x. By the way, remember that these are functions of, I mean, these are the values in 2 dimensions, right? So something like this. Okay. So of course it goes similarly, because Laplace transform is simply e to the power minus some sf. If f is a random variable defined as sum of some functions, we can evaluate the Laplace transform using the probability generating function. Okay, so let's, as similar to before, let's look at an example. I don't know if it is, it's probably 9. So what we want to do is we consider the same Poisson point process phi as the previous Campbell's theorem example, and we assume that alpha equal to 4. Okay, now we are a bit more careful about choosing alpha. Okay, now the Laplace transform, can you take out your notebooks and try to find out what would be the Laplace transform? You don't need to evaluate it in the final sense or the end expression, but simply write what it should look like. So the Laplace transform of the sum of interferences at the origin can be computed as, can you try to write it? It would be an expected value of e to the power minus si, right, which is nothing but e to the power minus 2 pi lambda integral of 0 to infinite 1. Remember how the PGFL looks like? It's simply e to the power minus lambda integral in 2 dimensions of 1 minus the function, right, integrated over the domain, or to talk about it more generally, it's something like this, right? And again, this Rd in our case is R2, but functions are evaluated only based on the distance where they are located at, which doesn't depend on the angles, and therefore 2 pi comes out. In general, it would be two integrals. One goes from 0 to 2 pi, the other goes from 0 to infinite. But whatever we are dealing with inside is not a function of the angles, only a function of the distance to the power minus 4 x dx. Is this clear for everyone? How did we reach here? So what you have to do is take out your notebooks and write this expression for I. I is nothing but sum of p x to the power minus 4, where x belongs to phi, or mod of x, right, where x
How
belongs
did,
to
how did the minus come? Minus 2 pi lambda.
this one. So
Yeah.
again, this will again, I mean, you will get used to it, don't worry.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah. So this is what the definition, or not the definition, but the let's call it the parent expression for PGFL is. So expectation of product of functions evaluated at points is simply e to the power. Oh, remember that it's only true for a Poisson point process. Okay, don't use it everywhere. So it's e to the power minus lambda times integral of 1 minus the function evaluated at a generic point integrated over the entire domain. Okay.
Sir,
Yeah.
can you please scroll down a bit to the expression that you finally got? Yeah, how did we get x dx? Shouldn't it be just normal dx?
So what we have is dx vectors, right? And as we discussed in the previous class, since these are two-dimensional things, this becomes r dr d theta, right? If you
Okay.
remember how, yeah,
Got it.
remember how do we convert into polar coordinates, right? So this is the two-dimensional Cartesian one, and then you convert into polar coordinates as r dr d theta. So here x is the one-dimensional thing. Okay, let me be a bit more consistent with my notation. So this is nothing but r dr evaluated at r to the power minus 4. Okay, now it's good. I hope this is okay. There will be many tools which we would be using throughout our course to evaluate these functions, and I'll not come to this at this stage, but when we actually go about characterizing the networks, we will come to see what are the tools we can use to evaluate these integrals in closed form. Okay, is there anyone who is comfortable with Mathematica? Have you heard about this tool or the software? No.
I have heard, but sir, I haven't used it.
आपने वो Wolfram Alpha use किया है क्या? Anybody has used this Wolfram
Yes,
Alpha?
sir.
Okay, so you
Yes, sir.
just need to do Wolfram Alpha for these kind of things. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and we will be using it extensively throughout this course. For those who are not aware, okay, let me give a brief example. So let me present my entire screen instead. Right. So what you have to do is go to wolframalpha.com, and in case, I mean, you do this only if you do not have a proprietary license to Mathematica. Okay, otherwise you directly do in Mathematica. But for simple integrals, you can just do integrate. I don't know, x. If you do integrate x and you press enter, it of course gives you x square by 2. Okay, I hope this is visible. Okay. You can do, for example, definite integrals, which means integrate x from 0 to 1. Okay, let's see if we can evaluate what we have with us currently, which is e to the power minus integral of 1 minus e to the power minus constant into x to the power minus 4. So we have integrate of exp of minus okay, integrate of 1 minus e to the power minus some constant times x to the minus 4 multiplied by another x, I think we have. Yeah, but that's the whole thing as well. So let's do this. and see if we can evaluate. Of course, depending on the notations that you use, okay, yeah, it is able to evaluate it. So it evaluates into these gamma functions, and which gives you directly what would be the Laplace transform of the sum of interferences. Okay. If you resolve it, okay, let me now go back to sharing only my note. I mean, these are just details, but if you are familiar with this tool, you would be able to do it. So, for those who have seen it for the first time, please open it up and I mean, not now, but later after the class, just open it up and do some experimentations with it. But if you evaluate what we had done, which was this function of gamma functions, or an expression consisting of gamma functions, and if you put the limits, which means you evaluate the definite integral, what this would result in is simply exp of minus pi lambda root over pi sp. Okay, so this final expression, it hardly matters why this is important right now. I'll not go into the details of this, but why characterizing a Laplace transform of the sum of interference is important, I'll go into this discussion instead, rather than what this expression is. Okay, which brings me to an important point. Who among you are familiar with the concept of fading, specifically fast and slow fading? Anyone?
Yes, sir.
So can you explain for all of us what is slow fading and what is fast fading?
So fading is basically an instantaneous fluctuation in the received signal strength. So
Mm-hmm.
it can be defined as a fast or the slow. So slow fading are basically those which occurs because of large scale shadowing effects. That means if the receiver is under a shadow of some huge building or huge structure, so that if you move a very little, the
Mm-hmm.
instantaneous fluctuation is not very much. But if you move significantly, then only the fluctuation will uh,
Mm-hmm.
there is some measurable fluctuation. However,
Mm-hmm.
those when the fluctuation occurs if the movement is in the order of the wavelength. So a very
Mm-hmm.
little results in a very rapid changes or fluctuation in the received signal strength. So
Right.
small scale fading occurs because of the multipath propagation. So a change in the position of the order of the wavelength can result the paths to be added constructively or destructively, so the signal strength fluctuates rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
However,
That's
large
right.
scale fading is because of one example I have given, that there is a huge structure which is blocking away. So
Mm-hmm.
it changes when you move few meters, or you can say, I mean, the scale is large here.
Mm-hmm.
So these two basically consider the fading part.
Right. Absolutely. So, what Hamza was trying to say here is that if you have a transmitter and a receiver, right, depending on the distances and other parameters around you or other environmental factors, you could observe some fluctuations in your received signal strength. Of course, measured for a very, very, very long time, all this fast fading business gets averaged on, and what you get is p into r to the minus alpha, or some version of it. Okay, not this one, but some version of it. Okay, but there are some more going on here. What are these more things going on? Suppose that there is a building, as Hamza mentioned, right? In that case, of course, it will not be the same as you would expect to get when there was no buildings here, right? So these kind of effects, which are large scale effects and which do not matter that much if you move a bit in the order of wavelength, which is of course not human movement. Okay, these are not affected by such small uh, changes, but occurs due to this large scale shadowing due to trees, buildings, and so on, is called slow fading. But we are not concerned about it at this point. What we are concerned about is locally around you there are many reflecting objects, okay, which provide multiple paths from the transmitter to the receiver, right? So something like this. This is one of the paths, and this is one of the paths. Now these depending on a, let's say, scatterer or a reflecting material here. Right. If you go back to your class 11th and 12th, if you remember the Young's double slit experiment, right? So what we observed in this Young's double slit experiment, there were two slits, out of which, I mean, you have a point source which passes this light through these two slits, and you have a screen where you capture how they are constructively or destructively interfering with each other, right? Why they do it, or how do they interfere, or how do they interfere with each other? It depends on the difference between the path lengths that they have observed from this transmitter to the location at the screen, right? So if you remember, there was a slit like this and a screen like that, a point source, and if you are looking at something like this here, you have different paths, or the length of this difference between the length of these paths, this one and that one, dictates whether you will see a bright fringe here or a dark fringe here, right? So electromagnetic waves behave similarly. So you have, even if you have only a direct path and no reflecting business around, if you have a different transmitting antenna, right, these two signals can interfere with each other constructively or destructively, and whatever signals that you are experiencing around you fluctuates when you move in the order of wavelength, which was happening here in the Young's double slit experiment as well, right? So what you are actually observing is a constant signal which is PR to the minus alpha, but instantaneously it is not exactly the same. It is modeled as some fluctuations around that signal. Now, let's say conceptually, is this discussion clear to you? Okay, why do we have a baseline thing which is defined rather on large scale parameters like distance and whether there are blockages and so on? Blockage can be modeled as some parameter which reduces, or which is multiplicative, which reduces the total power received at this point. But this baseline power which you are receiving is not the one which you are instantaneously observing. You are instantaneously observing something like this, which fluctuates around a baseline power. Is this part
Sir,
clear? Yeah.
this is fast fading.
Yeah. This second phenomenon is called fast fading.
And for this, like, even if so for this, we have to move in the order. For example, this graph that you have plotted, where the
Mhm.
waves, so these fluctuations are at time steps of steps of wavelength.
Right. I mean, you do not, I mean, this mobile phone does not necessarily have to move, because your environmental reflecting elements can move. For example, a car is moving, right? It can also change your
Okay,
behavior.
okay. So yeah, that will change the path length. So,
Right.
but how is it different from that small fading then? Like, in that, to dare to create a fading effect, I have to move larger than wavelength order. Like I.
Right. I mean, these large scale parameters define what your baseline performance would be. Right. It might change if you move, let's say, few meters. Right. Or in case if you are blocked by a building, it would change when you move so much that you are not anymore blocked by a building. So these baseline things uh, are something which is not a instantaneous parameter. What I want to say here is that this phenomenon, this fast fading phenomenon, is I mean, in terms of random variables, it is a more agile random variable. It
Okay.
changes more frequently than the other one.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions here? So in literature, or in your textbooks, or wireless communication textbooks, but I know that many of you might not have done wireless communications yet. So there are various models to emulate this fast fading, or there are many, let's say, parameters which allow you to model fast fading or integrate fast fading into your received signal model. So if anybody has a clue about how or what are the usual things that are, or usual models used for modeling fast fading, anyone?
So, sir, there is a little confusion actually.
Mhm.
So, one is slow fading and fast fading, whereas one is frequency selective and flat.
Mm-hmm.
So one depends on the multipath, or you can say Doppler spread of the
Mm-hmm.
signal, and another one depend upon the time coherence or the
Mm-hmm.
uh, time Doppler basically.
Mm-hmm.
So it
So,
depends if we
so
consider
current,
creating time
right,
as
right.
well.
So currently we are not going into that domain of whether it is frequency selective or flat, right? That just dictates whether, I mean, in your frequency spectrum, whether your fading parameters change with movement in frequency or not. The reasons for that and that phenomenon, currently we are not worried about this. What we are worried about is probably the time domain and how frequently your, I mean, of course, if everything is static in your environment, nothing, I mean, there would not be fading. Okay, you would either get a very bad signal or you would get either a very good signal. Is there any other reason why you would get fading? Fading is
Uh,
not just a
time.
destructive interference, it's the fluctuation between the constructive and destructive interference that you are observing, right?
Yes, sir. Yes. So time
Hmm.
coherence is basically the parameter, and
Mhm.
Doppler time spread.
Yeah, so we are not, yeah, it, you were saying something?
So there is model known as Jake's model, if
Mm-hmm.
I remember.
What we are rather interested in is how this power is behaving uh, due to the impact of fast fading.
So Rayleigh fading or something like that.
Yes. So can you explain what Rayleigh fading is?
Yes, sir. So in Rayleigh fading, the strength of the received signal, or you can say the amplitude of the received signal,
Mm-hmm.
basically follows a Rayleigh distribution. Rayleigh is a well-known distribution in
Mm-hmm.
wireless.
So
So
why does this come? This amplitude behaves as the Rayleigh distribution.
it is because we are considering the phase as well, because phase is also changing as well as the amplitude. So
Mm-hmm.
if we change it into the polar to, you can say, Cartesian, then we have two random variables, two Gaussian random variables, and
Mm-hmm.
they are adding up. So
Mm-hmm.
adding of two Gaussian random variable results into a Rayleigh type of random variable.
Yes, but not completely. I mean, addition of course, two Gaussian random variables is a Gaussian random variable. But what
Its
Hamza is trying,
amplitude is basically Rayleigh.
yes,
Its
yes,
amplitude
yes.
is Rayleigh.
So if you have a complex signal which is given by x plus yj, right, or jy, however you put it, what you want to model is these fluctuations in this let's say I channel and the q channel, so to say, loosely speaking, but the amplitude is of course given by root over x square plus y square, right? And you do not know what type of fluctuations, or if you have no means to model what type of fluctuation this individually x and y are observing in a complex signal x plus jy, right? Your amplitude is defined as square root of x square plus y square. And if you say that actually no, my signal is not x plus yj but random variables x plus random variable, I mean j times random variable y, where x and y individually I can model it as Gaussian distributed, because we will say that it is centered around something which we know, but due to noise and these fluctuations it is Gaussian distributed. What happens is, if x and y are Gaussian distributed, x square plus y square root over it is a Rayleigh random variable. So that's what we would measure, we would model the fluctuation in the amplitude of the signal as. So the amplitude of the signal fluctuates around a mean with a random variable which is Rayleigh distributed. But remember, we are here not interested in the amplitude. We are interested in the power. So what is the power? Power is simply the square of the amplitude, right? So can you tell me, if x and y are Gaussian distributed, how does x square plus y square vary as?
It's an exponential random variable.
Right. So this varies as an exponential. So this varies as a Rayleigh. So try to prove these things in your home. I understand that for many of you it might be a very new thing, but forget about the let's say communication aspect of it. But in your home, try to prove these things. What do you have to prove? If x and y are Gaussian distributed, try to prove that square root of x square plus y square is Rayleigh distributed. Also try to prove that x square plus y square is exponentially distributed. Of course, you can generalize this: x square plus y square plus z square plus dot 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 sum of many such Gaussian squares. Can anyone tell me what it is distributed as, or sum of n Gaussian squared?
It's chi-square.
Right. So sum of n Gaussian squared random variables is chi-square. The special case when n equal to 2, which means there are two Gaussian random variables, you square them and sum them. It's exponentially distributed, right? And that's how my power fluctuates around the mean. That's a model to emulate what my received power is. In other words, your received power, if you forget about the noise for the moment, my received power is the transmit power, the path loss, which we again have seen already, why it is r to the minus alpha, why in free space it's r to the minus 2, we have also seen that. But this is not the entire story. We will say that the received power instantaneously, or Ri, instantaneous received power, is fluctuating around this p r to the minus alpha with a more agile random variable, let's call it h, which is Rayleigh distributed. So this h actually takes in this value p r to the minus alpha, sorry, exponentially distributed. So h takes in this value p r to the power minus alpha and multiplies with a random variable which can either decrease this p r to the minus alpha, which are these cases, or increase the value of p r to the power minus alpha, which is that cases. Okay. I hope the development until now is at least intuitively clear to you.
Sir, will we add this or multiply this?
So you multiply this, right? Because if you add it, you will get something which is always greater than p r to the minus alpha. Right? So an exponentially distributed random variable is the domain is greater than 0.
Okay, yeah, okay.
This stuff is greater than 0, right?
Yes, sir, yes. Okay.
Okay. So h, I mean, coincidentally, an exponentially distributed random variable can be 0 as well, right? Or very close to 0 as well. That means the received instantaneous power, although you are very close located to the base station and the transmit power of the base station is very high, it can happen that due to this overwhelmingly destructive interference or overwhelmingly destructive combination of different reflected paths, your instantaneous received power may well be near to 0. Okay, and that parameter is controlled by something called h. Okay, so this discussion that we are having currently is supposed to be had at a larger detail at a later stage of the course, but why I am introducing it at this moment is that later on what we would be interested in is a parameter called SINR, which is called the signal to interference and noise ratio, which is simply your received signal, let's call it S, right, divided by the noise. We will again come to why this is denoted by n0 and what this is. Of course, the people from DCS would know what this is. I hope the MTechs also know it. And an interference term, which we have seen, is basically sum of interference powers coming from randomly located base stations. Okay. Now your received signal power, which is your numerator, if I call it HPR minus alpha according to this model, what we would be interested in is if you are running an application in your phone which needs the signal strength to be greater than a threshold, right? So suppose this is the power that you are receiving on an average. Suppose you are running an application which needs, okay, let's not get too congested here. Okay, so suppose you are running an application which needs at least some minimum threshold of signal power, SINR, to function, and you are getting an average power like this. However, due to this fast fading, sometimes you are dropping below this satisfactory level, let's call it gamma. Okay, what your operator is interested in are the times when you are actually below gamma. That gives you a performance guarantee. Okay, I mean, of course, if you find out the times it is above gamma, you automatically find out the times it is below gamma, right? So operator is interested in the probability that all these random variables involved here, that is the different distances of these base stations, interfering base stations, different fast fading observations that you are getting instantaneously at your receiver, what is the probability that my instantaneous SINR is above a certain threshold? Now, this threshold gamma, right, it might be different for different applications. For a voice call, you might not need a very high SINR, but if you are doing HD video download, you might need a very good signal strength, right? So this gamma is dictated by the application that you are running, and the operator sets it. What he is interested in is something he doesn't know are this location of these base stations. So I is belonging to that point process. So this is a random quantity involved here. This is another random quantity involved here. So this makes the entire left hand side very complicatedly random, right? What he is rather interested in is the probability that instantaneously my fast fading is greater than a term which is a function of the interference and the transmit power and the distances. So from this is of course equivalent to this. From here to here, is there any question? Or the development of this term, is there any question? So it's just to give you a very intuitive explanation of why are we going into these type of calculations. Okay, of course we will come back to this thing later, not later too far, but probably next week. Okay, so what we are interested in is this SINR, probability that this SINR is greater than some threshold, which can be of course said as the probability that the instantaneous fading is greater than some threshold. So since you have explained very well what exponential distribution, why it is exponentially distributed, can Hamza, can you tell us what exponential distribution is?
It's simply e raised to the power minus. If I correctly remember, there is a
So,
the
so the
power
CDF, yeah, you
CDF.
are correct. So the CDF of exponential distribution is 1 minus e to the power the parameter of the exponential distribution times x, right? However, here we are interested in the CCDF or the complementary CDF. Remember, CDF is simply the probability that the random variable takes in values less than x. Here we are interested in the probability that this random variable h takes in value greater than whatever this is in the right hand side. Okay. Whatever there is in the right hand side, remember that it is not a fixed quantity, but it is a random variable. Why? Because of the random locations of these base stations. So what we are interested in, if we remove or if we separate these two quantities, if you have been given R, this is a deterministic quantity, and of course there will be a parameter mu, but for the moment let us assume it is 1. This is a random quantity which is I, so we have to take an expectation over it. Okay, again, don't worry about it now. If you don't understand, I will go through these steps in detail later on. What I want, why I am developing this notion right now is to just to say that if you are interested in finding out whether my instantaneous fading is greater than some quantity, right, it separates into two quantities. One is deterministic, if you have been given this distance to your transmitter, and a random quantity which depends on the location of the interferers. Okay, now what you have at your hand is an expectation of e to the power minus summation of point functions evaluated at each point, right? Now what can you do? You can use your Laplace transform. In fact, you can go one step further here and write it as expected value of, so exponential of sum becomes product of exponentials. So exponential point functions evaluated at minus gamma I p r minus alpha, I belongs to xi belongs to phi. So this is an expected value of product of functions evaluated at locations of the point process. Now we can use our developed notion of what a probability generating functional is to evaluate such expressions. Okay. So why I gave this discussion, it was to make a connection that we are not studying some abstract mathematical things, but it would help us in characterizing these wireless networks. What the takeaway should be from this last half hour of discussion is that there would be later on in our life in this course, there would be expectation of product of point functions, and a way to evaluate them is the probability generating functional. Luckily for homogeneous Poisson point processes, they evaluate into a rather elegant form, which is e to the minus lambda times integral of 1 minus function evaluated at a generic point x integrated over the entire domain. As an example, we saw that if what happens if that function itself is the sum of interferences, right? In that case, it evaluates into a more elegant form, right? We would come back to this expression a bit later. Okay. So I hope, is there any question regarding the development until now? Yes, no?
So can you just point out where the Laplace transform figured in the end?
Right. So if you have this term with you, you can simply use the expression for the probability generating function, right?
Yeah.
Rather, if you stop at this place, right? So it is simply e to the expectation of e to the power minus s summation of I, right?
Okay, okay, okay.
So this is the form of writing.
Yes.
It's the same thing. It's writing in different ways.
Yeah, okay, I got it.
Hmm. Okay. So if this part is clear, what we have finished until now is the sum of functions, expectation of them, product of functions, expectation of them. How are we evaluating it? First instance using Campbell's theorem, second instance using probability generating functionals. We saw for Poisson point processes what form Campbell's theorem takes, what form probability generating functional takes. We need one more let's say ammunition with us in order to deep dive into characterization of, or the first characterization of very simple single tier networks. The ammunition that we need is a very important one, which we have neglected in the last couple of classes, is the distribution of the distance to your nearest point. Okay, we have briefly talked about it, but let's go into more formal way of defining it. Practically, example being, you are currently located at your home, right? You are interested in which base station you have connected to. Okay. Suppose your operator has a policy which says, and again it makes sense as well, which says that each mobile phone will connect to its nearest base station. Okay. So a signal strength that you are getting, you remember it is a function of the distance, right? From where you are, distance to your base station which is serving you. So what you are interested in is how this nearest base station is distributed. For a static network, if you are located at a particular point, your this distance is a deterministic quantity, which means if you are located at your home, the distance you can just go out and check how far your nearest base station is, probably 20 meters or 30 meters, 100 meters, whatever. But if you are thinking about in terms of these Poisson networks, and I have given enough motivation why we should study these Poisson networks, the distance to the nearest base station around you becomes a random quantity, because not only your location might vary and that therefore the distance to the nearest base station might vary, but also the realizations of the network around you might vary. Okay, so we are interested in the CDF and the PDF of the distance to the nearest point.
So this
So
is not linked to marked point process, right?
no, this is just points.
Yeah. We are
There is
just
no
looking
proper.
at the closest distance, not distribution of distances around us.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we are only focusing on the closest point from us, and we are interested in the distribution of this distance between myself and the closest point. Okay. So, in fact, you yourself will derive it. I'll just help you along the way. So, what you are interested in is a point process. Again, and I cannot repeat it enough number of times. When I say point process, do not have in your mind a static realization of it. Remember that it contains of infinite number of such realizations where the number of such x's varies, their relative positions from each other also varies. But what we are interested in is this distance, which is the distance to the nearest one, and how it varies across realizations. The problem statement is clear. The distribution, let's call it d1. Let's call the variable d1. The distribution or the CDF of d1 x is defined as the probability that d1 is less than x. Okay, this, I mean, until this point there is nothing big happening. Okay, this I can write as 1 minus the probability that d1 is greater than x. Okay, this is also straightforward. Now I would like you to focus on this part. The probability that d1 is greater than x, it means what? It means that even for a realization when you did not know where these red x's are located, right? What you are focusing on is a distance x, right? Let's call this as distance x. You are interested in the probability that within x there are no red x's occurring. That itself is a probability that d1 is greater than x. So d1 is greater than x means within x there are no red points occurring. Is this clear what I'm saying, or am I saying something which is not very clear? So this refers to, yeah.
So if we take a set A of radius x, then is this equal to probability of psi A equal to 0?
Sorry, yeah, that's how we would be developing it. Yes. So I mean, naturally this set A is supposed to be a circle, right? Because if there is no point within x near to you, that means there are no points within x in any possible directions. That intuitively means a circle, right? So if we are considering this set A, this implies this is equal to 1 minus the probability that the number of points in set A equal to 0. Can anyone tell me what this is for a Poisson point process? I think I have said it, I
Sir,
mean,
e to
quite
the
enough.
minus
Hmm.
lambda pi r square.
Right. Right. So this, one of the most important results we would be using throughout the course is that for a homogeneous Poisson point process, remember this is for a HPPP. The distance distribution to the nearest point is given by 1 minus e to the power minus pi lambda x square. This naturally means that the PDF of x, which is derived simply by the differentiation of the CDF, is 2 pi lambda x exp minus pi lambda x square. Okay, it's simply the differentiation of the above. As a simpler example, you tell me what would be the distance distribution to the nearest point of this example, where I am observing a one-dimensional line and I am interested in a Poisson point process phi with an intensity lambda in this one-dimensional line, right? And of course, I mean, for the purpose of our of this argument, let us only consider one side of it. I mean, there is no line like this. Okay, so I'm interested in points like this red x within the considered domain, which is x greater than 0. Within this x greater than 0 domain, I define a Poisson point process, homogeneous Poisson point process. Of course, it is not totally homogeneous, right? I mean, if you consider the entire line from minus infinite to infinite, it is not homogeneous because there is no point here, there is point here. So this naturally means it's not homogeneous. But within the domain x greater than 0, I am defining a homogeneous Poisson point process given by this red axis, and I am interested in what would be my first point from the origin, right? So if I call this d1, can you tell me, so let's call this example 10. So can you tell me what would be the distance distribution of d1 here? CDF, let's say the CDF. What would be the CDF? Come on, it's very simple, right? So remember what we are trying to say is I mean, it's simply the probability that d1 is less than x. It is equal to the probability, or sorry, 1 minus the probability that d1 is greater than x, which means 1 minus the probability that number of points within 0 to x is 0, right? This let's make it more formal, okay? And this is 1 minus, how do you calculate the probability? What is the I mean, what is the probability that the number of points is k? Poisson distributed, right? So what would be this probability that there are no points? Yes, Vaibhav, you were trying to say.
So e to the power uh, minus lambda. Sorry, so lambda, that power to the power 0 and divide by 0 factorial, and e to the power of minus lambda.
Yeah, this is it, right? So it's e to the, yeah, you were right. E to the power minus lambda x to the power 0 by 0 factorial, right? It's simply e to the power minus lambda x. Yeah. So these points we would be interested in while characterizing networks, because if you remember our previous I mean rather larger discussion that we were having, is that my nearest base station is at a distance of r. We said that this is a deterministic quantity, it results in a deterministic quantity, but it is not really true because this r now becomes a random variable. But we will come to these larger let's say more complicated stuff later on. For the remainder of today's class, 5 minutes what we have left, let me try to show you how would you in your home at least try to simulate such networks. Okay, so let me just share my MATLAB instead. Okay, so I have a program written with me which defines what the nearest point distribution is. Okay, so I hope you can see my screen. If it is not visible, please let me know. I can try to maybe undock it and then maximize it. Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay, so if it's visible, what we have here is a one-dimensional point process that I am defining with a intensity lambda, which is lambda equal to 0.1. It means, again, on an average, there is a point within, I mean, on an average, there is a point every 10 meters. Other way to look at it is per unit length, there is 0.1 number of points. I am looking at a distance of 0 to 50 or 0 to r, which is 50 here, and I will be doing 10,000 iterations of the point process. Again, don't worry about void count here. Let me just comment out this void counts so that it doesn't become too complicated to explain. Okay. So for each iteration, which means I am having a loop from I goes to 1 to iterations. For each iteration, first, if you remember the discussion we were having in the first class, there is two steps to generate a point process, not two ways, sorry, two steps to generate a point process. First, you take a random number of balls outside from your bag. The second step is to throw them in the ground. Okay. Now, how do you define a Poisson point process? The number of balls that you have taken out of this bag is a Poisson random variable. So we define a Poisson random variable. So if I am observing a distance of 0 to 50, how many points on an average would be there? Lambda times r, right? Some of you already explained in the beginning of today's class, where I was asking the average number of points within a ring. Within a ring, it would be lambda times pi b square minus a square. Here it is simply lambda times r, right? So number of points is a Poisson random variable with parameter lambda into r, right? Once we have this number of points, what we have to do is these random points are uniformly distributed between 0 and r, right? You have certain number of points n, and these n points I am having their distances distributed uniformly. So rand 1 comma n generates a uniform random variable between 0 and 1, and I'm multiplying with r to generate a random variable uniformly distributed between 0 and r, and I am calculating the minimum of such distances. Okay, later on what I would do, I would be plotting the CDF. So I have it here, which is the CDF plot of near. Near just simply means the distance to the nearest point. So let's plot it first. This will give my simulated distribution of the nearest point, but I would want to match it with whatever we are developing, right? So what are we developing? We are saying that, hold on, we don't need to find out, or we don't need to do these 10,000 iterations to find out the nearest point every time and find out the CDF of it. Rather, I'll just use my analytical expression which I have just derived, which is 1 minus e to the power minus lambda r, and see how far or near they are. Okay. So if I run it, of course, I hope that it will match perfectly. I think I checked it just before the uh, class. So let me try to undock it and see if there is a issue. Okay. So it doesn't work because there is left hand side has different number of elements. I don't know what this is, but let me try to. Okay, it doesn't work. So let me try to find out this, if this is the issue. I think ni was 0 and that's why it was creating an issue. If it was an issue, then let me just try to increase. It should work now. Okay, so I am plotting this empirical CDF with blue and the analytical CDF with R. Naturally, they match with each other. The other thing that you can use this small experiment to demonstrate is what is the probability that there are no points within the entire domain. So remember what we are doing, we are drawing a line between 0 and r, which is 500 meters here. So what would be the probability that there are no points inside this entire, I mean, I am taking out this number of balls and throwing them between 0 and 500 meters, but still there is a probability, since it's a random distribution, there is a probability that there are no points inside this domain at all, right? So what is the probability that there are no points inside this domain at all? It's simply e to the power minus lambda times the length of the domain. Yes, Vaibhav, you were saying?
No, so I was saying that expression only.
Right. So that's another way to evaluate it. So let's call this counting the number of times no points are generated. Let's see how points are generated. Okay. So in the first iteration, if I stop it, I have n. Right. If I go to the next step, possibly. So in my first iteration, 6 points are generated. Okay. In my second iteration, 9 points are generated, and so on. Okay, so there will be cases when there are no points generated, right? For those cases, let's count the number of such occurrences, which means if ni equal to 0, we add void count with 1. Okay. For this case, we are not interested in plotting the CDF, but rather calculating the void probability, right? So we are good to go. So if we run this, okay, void count I have to define. If we run this, we would have n, which is the number of points generated each time, I don't know if at any time it is generated as 0 or not. Yes, there is one of them. So let's see how many times it is generated. So void count 70 times. So the probability that there are no points is void count divided by iterations, 0.007. That's a fancy number to have. Let's check it with exp of minus lambda times the entire domain, which is r. Okay, very close enough, let's say. Why there is a mismatch, or why there is a very minor mismatch of 0.0003? Because of course your Poisson point process is defined in the entire two-dimensional plane, but we of course do not have the computational capability to have, or in this case it's the entire one-dimensional line from 0 to infinite, but we are defining it from 0 to 50. The more you increase your domain, of course it gets more better and better. Okay, also if you increase the number of iterations, it should get better and better. So let's run for 20,000 times and see if we have void by. Okay, it's still fluctuating, but it's about 0.007. What we want is this one. Okay, I will share this code with you. Please, before the next class as well, try to tweak some parameters and see how it behaves. More interestingly, try to plot few things. How does this void probability change with the length of the domain? How does it change with lambda? More interestingly, so if I decrease lambda, do you think void probability will increase or decrease? If I make it 1 out of every 100 meters, or let's say 5 out of every 100 meters, the void probability, do you think it will increase or decrease?
Increase.
Right. So if we'll run it, void probability we are getting as 0.08, increase 10 times. Let's see what it gives. Okay, good enough. Share this, try to some parameters and some observations. In the next class, we will discuss a more elaborate. We'll do a more elaborate coding assignment together. I'll not give you some exercise to do it, and move on to how we actually model these networks. We'll also see some theoretical things as well. One point to note here is in the next class, the final half an hour, which is from 5 to 5:30. I will be taking a very short quiz of 5 marks. You don't need to study something extra. All the things that I would be giving in that quiz are included until today's class. If you just go through the notes, they are just numericals using the formulas that we have derived. Not complicated stuff like Campbell's theorem or probability generating functional, but simply probabilities like this. Any queries?
How will we have to submit that? Write and scan. Okay.
Yeah, you can write it and scan it. So at 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock, I will stop the class, but I will be present in this video call and I will upload the question. I can share the question in the screen here. Just write it in your notebook. Use any references that you can use and upload it at 5:30, right? Okay.
Sir, what
Yeah.
about project? So we are going to start it.
Yeah, so many of you have contacted me regarding this. So I was waiting until I give a complete demonstration of at least one example. So what is this example? I will do it in the not in the next class, but next Monday. Okay, next class is Monday, right? Let me see. Yeah, next class is Monday. So yeah, so not on Monday. So I will be doing it next Thursday. What we will be doing is we will start with a single tier network and do a complete characterization of that single tier network, which means we will derive the SINR, we will derive SINR coverage probability, rate coverage probability, and so on. At that point, you would be familiar with the theoretical as well as how to simulate it. At that point, you feel free to choose your project topic.
Okay.
Have one. Yeah, you can have one-to-one discussions on what you would like to work on. But I am waiting for you to get equipped with these things and be familiar with the coding aspect of it as well. Okay, guys. Thank you so much. So see you in the next class.
And sir, can you upload the last week, the last lecture recording also?
Okay. Have I not done it? Okay. I must have forgotten. So I will do.
level, along with this lecture recording.
Yes. I'll do. I'll do it. I'll do it. So lectures 3 and 4. Yes, I'll do it. Thank you.